everyone. We're going to focus on how to create a welcoming learning environment for students. So this is the beginning of the semester type focus. So I want you to first think, I'm just going to ask you to engage in this activity. Pretend you're a student who's walking out of your first day of class. So it's your class, but pretend you're a student in your class. What would you, as the student, tell your friend about your experience in your class? What do you want them to be able to say? So I'm going to give you a moment to think about that and pause and consider what students may be saying now and what you might want them to say. Okay, so what we're going to do today is hopefully be able to help you create that positive learning atmosphere that you're wanting. And the agenda really is we'll talk about two different things: the goals of the first day of class and some strategies to achieve those goals. So what is the goal of your first day of class? I'm going to ask you to think about this question. What is it that you're trying to accomplish on that very first day? So again, I'll give you a few minutes to think about that. Well, Anderson, McGuire, and Corey talk about having several different goals. We want to certainly grab the students' attention. We want to get them excited about the content, but we also want to get them into the content. So it's really not just about getting them comfortable. We also want to start helping them learn our discipline. So it's about the content as well as the environment. So you can see here that they also talk about developing skills. So we may be setting the stage for the development of perhaps maybe group skills if we're going to be using a lot of group work in our class, things of that nature. And it's very important that we also establish inclusion and connections, because there's a lot of research that really speaks to the value of this. And we'll go over a little bit of that research today. So first day of goals, first I always like, when I think about my class, I want to make sure that students find it to be of value. So it depends on what you're teaching and whether or not students are choosing to take your course. That may happen naturally, or whether maybe it's a requirement and it may not happen naturally. You may have to work a little bit harder to help your students really see the value of the course. So you might want to think about what meaning it has, how does it fit into the overall context, and the important skills and knowledge that they'll walk away with. And then I always think it's essential that you're starting to create a sense of community. Knowing students' names goes a really long way. It's a powerful strategy. And I know it's a challenge, especially if you're teaching multiple sections with many students. But if you can put a name, to the face, that really speaks volumes to students about how much you care. So I think that's kind of essential. We also want to use the first day to establish the expectations for what your class is going to be like and give them a sense of what kind of learning activities they're going to get to experience with you throughout the semester. So in essence, we're trying to create a challenging yet supportive learning environment. That's the goal. So the engagement really happens on a couple of different levels. As I said before, we want them to be engaged with one another, so classmates is important. We certainly want to develop a rapport with our students. A professor-student relationship is essential to learning. And we also want to get them hooked into the content. So it's really about these three different areas. As we structure our first day of class, we need to think about what are those goals and how can we best accomplish them. You'll hear me say that over and over again throughout the semester. What are the goals and how do we know if we've accomplished them and what's the best path to get there? That's what we just talked about in our outcomes design module. So I think it's important to think about some diversity issues as well. And Lodkowski and Ginsberg has this really great framework of how to motivate students in an inclusive way. So it's kind of a culturally responsive approach to making sure students feel included and a part of your class. And you can see here they talk about 4 primary motivational conditions. First is establishing inclusion, and the first day of class is essential to that. We want to make sure we're fostering an environment that is filled with respect and that also builds connections, as I said before, not only to each other, to you as a professor, and to the content. We also want to help them develop attitudes, positive ones, of course. And this really speaks to the power of mindset. We need to know how important that really is to our work. Students need to think that they can be successful in this class, and they also need to focus on things that are within their control. That's that internal locus of control that's mentioned there. The third pillar, motivational pillar, is enhancing meaning. And this goes back to that value piece. Remember, we spoke a moment ago about the importance of students understanding the value of your class. Well, enhancing meaning is really where we try to accomplish that. We show them the real world applications and why it matters and why this course has value. And this also gets students engaged in higher level tasks. So when we set the stage with telling them about the kinds of learning activities we're going to be involved in throughout the semester, that can also show them how this is going to be a pretty high level course, and students tend to be more engaged when there's a challenge present. Now, last but not least, we need to engender competence, which means that students have to have a high self-efficacy. Self-efficacy is the belief in your ability to successfully complete a task. So we need to kind of keep that in mind. And I always say that faculty are in a great position of building self-efficacy because that is built when you have successful experiences. And we get to determine what their experiences will look like, how challenging those tasks will be, what kinds of supports we're going to provide them to achieve that success, how much feedback we're going to give them along the way. So we really are in a position of power of building self-efficacy. And of course, last but not least, we want to celebrate the success and all the different kinds of success, not just one. There isn't a one-size-fits-all approach really with success. We want to make sure that all of our students in our class feel appreciated and included and are a part of our celebration. So when we talk about how do we establish inclusion and this whole focus on respect and connection, I think the most obvious answer is doing some type of icebreaker at the beginning of the semester. There's a ton of research really speaking to how valuable that can be. But I do want to give you a word of caution. It is important to be aware of the different cultures that may be in your classroom. Students coming from different backgrounds may have very different comfort levels with participating in a icebreaker activity. So I do want you to be mindful of that. The other thing that I would say to you is that we want to try to, because we have such a lofty goal, we want them to be engaged with the content, engaged with one another, develop a relationship with us. We may want to try to find icebreakers that attack a couple of those pieces of the goal. So for instance, instead of just having a fun icebreaker that might accomplish that connection piece, we may want to have an icebreaker that's directly connected to our content. So for instance, in my psychology courses, I often will play the name game, and that gets me, up to speed on who their names are. And the name game basically works where everyone kind of goes around the room and they come up with an adjective that describes themselves, but it has to start with the same first letter that their first name starts with. So my name's Christine. I often use caring Christine. It gives you kind of, a descriptor, getting to know me a little bit better, and the C is a cue to help me learn. And then we have to go around and memorize that. And the way I build that into the psychology courses is I focus on memory and how memory works and how when you attach meaning and you build in retrieval cues, that really makes a difference. So you can see how that would be more meaningful than, just taking, you may have seen the M&M icebreaker activity before. Take a handful. Well, now, however many you have to tell us that many different things about yourself. And that's great for making a connection, but not enough really in terms of accomplishing, more than one goal. So in terms of being culturally responsive, we do want to explain to our students the importance of relationships so they understand why we're having all this active learning and opportunity for collaboration. And again, we want to send a pretty important message that we believe in their ability to complete these tasks and to achieve. That will be particularly important to students who may have low self-efficacy. We can be kind of a natural cheerleader in that regard. So let's take a peek at some of the research on, the first day of class and why it matters. Well, this research by Leg and Wilson is very interesting, and it actually is about fostering connection with your students. So this is the professor-student relationship even before the semester begins. In this study, you can see that students were randomly assigned to either receive an email or not receive an email prior to the start of class. The teaching assistant was the one that sent the email out, so the professor actually didn't know who received the email and who didn't. So they were kind of blind to the study. And what you can see here by the findings is the red bar is the group of students who did receive the email, and the blue bar is the one who did not. So at the beginning of the semester, during the first week, they asked them, so what do you think about this class? And they asked them some other questions about their attitude and motivation about the class. And you can see that students who received that email had a much higher perception of the class, more positive perception. Now that's pretty interesting, but the most fascinating part to me is that this was true at the end of the semester as well. So it held true. The only difference between those sections were whether or not an email went out, and you can see that the positive impact really lasted the entire semester. So this is perfect evidence that small actions can have big impacts in terms of fostering that connection and positivity about the class. Here's another study by Wilson and Wilson. What they basically did is on the first day of class, they had kind of contrived an experiment where students were brought into either one room or the other, and they were told the faculty member couldn't come, but they had played a video message from the faculty member. One video message was very friendly, and the other was just kind of more factual and not emotional. And what you can see is the students who received that positive first day experience had higher motivation again across the entire semester, and they also had higher levels of achievement. So here's some evidence that this really starts to not just make them feel good, but also helps contribute to a positive academic performance. This is a great study by Herman and colleagues, and what Herman did was they looked at this first day of class activity called the reciprocal interview. And you can see here the students weren't randomly assigned, but instead the class sections were randomly assigned to either have this activity or not have this activity. And then at the end of the semester, they measured both the support and satisfaction of the students. So what is this reciprocal interview? Well, they had about 5 or 6 students, and the activity took about 10 or 15 minutes for the first part, where they discussed the course expectations and things of that nature. Then the professor went around and interviewed somebody from that group who represented the group about what they learned about the course expectations. But then the reciprocal part was that group then got to interview the faculty member. So it was all focused on course expectations. So you were certainly getting oriented to the course as well as getting to know one another. And here are what the results showed. Again, if you had that activity, you had much higher ratings on the scale that measured whether or not you had a favorable attitude towards class. So they perceived the class to be a much more valuable learning experience if they had that first day of class activity. Now, here's another way we can get involved with kind of more active approaches on the first day. Some faculty are using games, and you can see here, this is an example from the business world where they use something called the exchange game. And this research really showed that the faculty who used this game had positive impacts, again, not only on the first day, but staying with them throughout the semester. So here's how the study was set up. They had a control group and an experimental group. So obviously the experimental group was the one who got to play the game. Control group did not. And not surprisingly, the game group was more satisfied with the course. But here's the surprising kind of finding here, that the game, the students who got to participate in the game also believed that the course requirements were better explained, even though that was not different. They had measures to make sure that those were consistent. So in psychology, we call that the halo effect. When you think one good thing, you start to think other positive things about that class. So they just kind of made that transfer into some other areas that weren't even actually true, but that positive impact just kind of trickles into other areas as well. Now, this may not be your style to do karaoke, but Baker talked about how this was a great strategy that they found to use in their sociology class, especially when it was a large lecture class. And you can see they had karaoke related to the content. And, they talked about how this was really perceived as being a fun, non-threatening kind of environment, and got students really engaged in the course from the start. So I'm certainly not talented at karaoke. I'm not sure I'll pull that one off, but I just want to share with you a variety of approaches. Many folks have looked at music and how that really reduces stress, and you can see that when music is played, even at the beginning of class, that can set a very different tone for what that experience is going to be like. So there's just another idea about how you can start to create a welcoming environment. There's that name game I explained to you before. That's the one I spoke to you about. I'll share another example with you as well. So on the first day of class, in upper level psychology classes, I use this activity that I have called dusting off the cobwebs. And I'll have students stand up, and they'll stand in rows, and they'll be facing one another. So they're kind of like in one big long row, and if it's a larger class, there might be 2 or 3 rows. But there's 2 people standing face to face, kind of in this row kind of format. And what I'll do is I'll throw out theories and concepts from our Intro to Psych course and see what they can remember. So you're dusting off the cobwebs, so to speak. They're supposed to talk to the partner across from them about what do you recall. And then for the next one, I have them rotate. So one of the rows moves, the other one stays where they are, so that they end up having a new partner, new concept or theory. And again, they're spending about 30 seconds or a minute in each spot, and we probably do maybe, 10 or so different concepts that we're talking about. Now, one great way to use the syllabus, a lot of folks go over the syllabus. That really can make for a very dry, boring beginning start of the semester. That usually it's information overload. Students can't take it all in anyway. So I have in recent years started using the jigsaw classroom approach. And basically, what that means is you start in one group and you might have a group of, let's say, 4 students. Then each of those students are going to be assigned a different area of the syllabus to become an expert on. And by the way, we're going to talk in a lot more depth about jigsaw classrooms. So if you're not following, don't panic. You're going to get it as we move throughout the semester. But anyway, we'll go back to this situation. So you have 4, and each person then becomes an expert on a different part. So maybe the first person is going to become an expert on what the learning outcomes are. Maybe the next person is going to be an expert on the policies. Maybe somebody else on the grading scheme. Maybe somebody else on the course outline. Maybe assignments, whatever, however you want to break up the syllabus. Then what happens is they all separate and all of the expert groups get together. So all of the policy folks over here, all the assignment folks over here, all the learning outcome folks over there. And their job is to really master that part of the syllabus so that they can teach their classmates or those home group members about it. So they get about 10 minutes, 15 minutes in the breakout groups. They go back to that original group of 4. And in this group, each person gets a turn to talk about the syllabus. So I find that's a great way for them to get to know students in the class and to become familiar with the expectations. So you're going to have to think about what your plan is. It will vary a little bit based on what your discipline is. There may be some disciplines that you're like, yes, this is going to work perfectly, and others where you may have to think about it a little bit more. But determining how you can set the stage for this is a really powerful way to begin. Whenever you're working on any lesson, including a lesson that's focused on establishing inclusion, again, you always keep that goal in mind. So that's what you always start with.